Bruce Feldman, a guy that breaks a lot of stories, Fox Sports 1, FS1, SI.com, longtime national college football analyst. Bruce Feldman, welcome back to Tuscaloosa. I hope you're doing well, sir.
I'm doing good. Good to be on with you today.
Hey, no doubt. Spending a little time talking some college football, and this 10th coach, the additional coach in college football, has made your job quite busy around this time of the year.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think a lot of people initially, when they heard that there was going to be a 10th coach added, months and months before it got implemented, they thought, oh, this is going to be like probably a graduate assistant or, analysts get bumped up. And in a couple of instances that's happened. But I would point you to the hire that, we reported a couple of days ago and just became official today at Michigan. Jim McElwain, who people in the SEC know very well, he was the 10th assistant that Jim Harbaugh just hired. Now he's going to be the receivers coach. He may have eventually a more involved role with play calling and the offense there, but he's the 10th assistant, and we've seen certainly a lot of other hires that are being made, around the country. I think the one you're talking about as it relates to, my scoop last night was Alabama getting Miami's defensive line coach, Craig Kuligowski, one of the most respected defensive line coaches in the country. That's another great addition for Nick Saban's staff this offseason.
Yeah, and I want to spend a little time. I went to the media guide at University of Miami after your article last night because I got to be honest with you. Up until last night when you tweeted that out and put it on SI.com, I didn't know the name Craig Kuligowski. But obviously you dive into it, you look at the stats. This guy creates a lot of production with his defensive lineman at the two spots that is the most recent at Missouri and University of Miami.
Yeah, so, for people just in context, at Missouri, you remember, they had a lot of good defensive linemen. In his 15 years there, he developed 5 first-round picks and a bunch of other, draft picks and high-level players, both in the Big 12 and then certainly in the SEC. And I think what's worth noting is some of those guys. Charles Harris recently was a good example. There was a few other guys he's had who, it's not like they came in as, a lot of them were like 2- and 3-star guys who leave as first rounders or high draft picks. And so I think you see what he's able to do developing talent. It's not like he's been recruiting a lot of 5-star guys, but he has been developing a lot of 4- and 5-star talent. I mean, even in Miami, just in the 2 years there, I thought he really upgraded what they were able to do. I've talked to coaches who faced him and faced his defensive line. They may not know him personally, but they know the product on the field has been really, really impressive. And so, within the business, he's regarded as one of the best defensive line coaches in the country just because the work and the product speaks for itself.
Let me spend some time talking about the defensive side of the football. Obviously, a new name, which the only name that will be returning from last year's defensive side of the football is Tosh Lupoi, and he's going to have another responsibility of calling plays. How much do you think that will influence the way that Alabama plays on that side of the football with all those new faces?
Well, I think it'll have maybe a little different flavor, but remember, you have, a lot like TCU where you have a head coach who's heavily involved with the defense, who's a great defensive mind. At TCU, it's Gary Patterson. Obviously, in Tuscaloosa, it's Nick Saban. But I think Tosh, he's had opportunities to go run somebody else's defense at pretty high levels of college football. So I think, he's there. I expect him to be aggressive. That's kind of from the systems he's come from, but certainly he has learned well under Nick Saban. And, I just think that some of the pieces they put around, not to mention, the talent we're talking about that's there. You're going to lose Minka Fitzpatrick. That he's a fantastic player, but I just think you lose Deron Payne. He's an awesome physical specimen. But I know some of the athleticism and talent they have. They're on a different level from almost anybody else in the country. I mean, you can say Clemson probably has a better defensive line right now than what they're returning, but just across the board, they have just recruited and developed so well. I don't expect there to be any drop off at all, even though there's going to be a new guy, new defensive coordinator.
Bruce, you have studied the quarterback. You've written about it, the making of modern quarterbacks that you can find on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's a complete in-depth of the making of modern-day quarterbacks there. How surprised were you to see Nick Saban go to his backup quarterback in the championship game?
I think it wasn't shocking just because, we've heard so much about Tua's talent, and they were struggling. They needed a spark, and, after the first series, it was a little bit, shaky, as not surprising. But then, he started making plays, first with his legs, then obviously with that arm. And I think that, you have a coach who is above second guessing, if there is such a thing in our society, just because of when it comes to what's on the field. Nick Saban has earned it. I mean, you're talking about the greatest college football coach in the history of the game at this point. And I don't think he needed to win that national title to get elevated to that. He was already there in my mind. And so, he has a better feel for his team than anybody else is going to have. And I don't think it was shocking. And, it obviously paid off. Who's to say, would they have found a way to win that game if he doesn't make the move? We'll never know. But just the way Tua played, it was a classic game, especially in the second half with, two really talented teams going at it. And you had a lot of young kids, not just Tua, making big contributions for the Crimson Tide that night.
Well, Bruce, I thought the one thing that when I go back and I watch the game, it wasn't just that one change that Tua brought in. It was the energy level that team, the confidence that they had in a young player, that obviously had showed something enough in practice that those guys believed that he could get the job done.
Well, I think they're there, as you said, at practice. They're around it. And I think there's a lot of belief where you see a lot of the guys who stepped up. Like I said, they were other true freshmen. And I think that they know that they're there. They're there every day. The media gets a small window to see, those guys get to see everything. And I think they have enough confidence to know, and it's been, I think looking back, it's been, over a month now. I'm trying to remember when, after the game in the locker room, I remember talking to Minka Fitzpatrick, and he had about talking to Tua before the change was announced, but he had already knew about it. I just think when you have the leaders of the team like that, who are so on board with everything, where it's like they're really like coaches, coaches in pads. I think it makes everything a lot more manageable, just because there's so much trust in what they're doing and the leadership that they're playing for.
Bruce, I know this is an opinion, but certainly you've been covering college football for a long time. You've been covering Nick Saban. We're talking to Bruce Feldman right now on the game. What do you think happens to Jalen Hurts?
I don't know. I think they're going to feel like, hey, let's see what happens in the competition this spring and see where it goes from there. I don't think I don't know if I would see there's parallel to what happened at Ohio State, a few years ago, where you had three quarterbacks and then eventually, obviously Braxton Miller became a receiver. But I think there are some similarities where you get one guy who's more of a dual threat guy. There's some questions about his ability in terms of the downfield passing game, which you certainly have with J.T. Barrett, and I think you've had with Jalen to some degree, where you have the other guy with a big, powerful arm who's really shined on the biggest stage and come through. At that point, I think what's different a little bit there was, you have a program that was kind of flashing up, whereas here you have a program in Alabama where it's just kind of what we expect of them. So I don't know. I mean, could Jalen go transfer and sit and go play someplace else? I'm sure he could. I'm sure he could probably play for 90 to 120 schools, depending on the system fit and everything. But in everything how he handled it, I mean, I think he knows he's in a really good situation there. I mean, let's not forget he was a Conference Player of the Year, a year ago. So I don't know I don't know if anybody knows how it's going to read or what's going to happen. I just think you play out the year, see what direction it goes. We've seen a lot of teams, end up having to play two quarterbacks just because it's a physical game and guys are going to take their shots. And I think it's one of the more intriguing storylines of the 2018 season coming up.
We're talking to Bruce Feldman. Let me go back to these coaching changes just for a couple of minutes. I know you've had some comments about Josh Gaddis and the energy, the recruiting, the way that he coaches those wide receivers. Another, I don't know if you want to say upgrade, but certainly somebody that grabs your attention as being added to the staff here in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that just having known him a little bit at Penn State and knowing people who've worked with him, I thought that's a great hire. I mean, it would not surprise me within 5 years if Josh Gaddis is a head coach somewhere. I thought two of the real big additions that Saban made, and I think Jeff Banks is as good a special teams coordinator as there is in college football. The other thing, Jeff Banks is a phenomenal recruiter. I mean, he showed that at Texas A&M, and he's a high-energy staff guy. I mean, I think both those guys were, as one of the things that I think is really underrated, and it's what's gone on in the last decade at Alabama so unprecedented, is just the ability to kind of keep evolving. And I think these two guys certainly will help that staff do that.
It's kind of funny that we're talking about a national title. Just six weeks ago yesterday, Alabama captured that national title. But then you go through recruiting, and maybe it didn't work out as well as Nick Saban would have liked for it to. And now he's kind of revamping and bringing all these coaches in and moving different pieces, trying to gear up because it's another recruiting cycle approaching as he'll go through and begin to build these relationships. And something tells me he probably didn't like finishing 6th in the recruiting rankings.
Yeah, although I'm sure he's pretty comfortable in his own evaluations, and whether he came in 4th or 6th, I don't think he's sitting there going, "Oh, this recruiting site had us this and this." I mean, ultimately, it's like, how did all these pieces fit together for what we're building? And so, I mean, my guess is he couldn't tell you exactly who was ranked where, a year ago. I mean, some coaches get bonuses for that sort of thing, but I just don't, I think sometimes you're going to have more scholarships to fill than others, and certain, it's, when you have a true freshman quarterback be the hero of the national title game, it's harder to bring in a quarterback that year. I mean, obviously Georgia was able to do that to some degree. It's not like Jake Fromm had a really good year and they got arguably the top quarterback in the country to replace him, or not, to try to replace him. So I just think that those are all little, big pieces into the puzzle.
Who will challenge Alabama in the SEC West as that back of, obviously Auburn had a great year this year, but who is that next team? Could it be Texas A&M? Could it be LSU? What team is going to push Alabama in the SEC West?
If I had to guess, I would say it would either be Texas, it would either be Mississippi State or Auburn. I think LSU is probably a year away from really making a run at it. They're going to break in a new starter in Miles Brennan. They lose Darius Guice. I think they'll probably be better on the defense, actually, but I don't think offensively they will be. And I look at A&M, and I just think that, they may be another 8 or 9 win team, but probably not there. I do like both Auburn and Mississippi State have really talented dual threat quarterbacks who I think should be real difference makers for them. I mean, Auburn lost some really good players too, but I think I don't think either team is on Alabama's level at this point. I think you have both of them are like around top 15 teams, where I think Alabama's obviously should be ranked number 1 or number 2, depending on who else you're looking at. I just think that's how it's set up.
Will this become a norm that Georgia's part of the college football playoff conversation?
The University of Georgia?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, look, the way he's recruiting, and obviously got a lot of momentum. It's a hot program. I'd be surprised if they weren't after, this first couple of years there.